What can say without words? This person is very insecure. I'm fairly convinced that a senior manager at my workplace has a strange fixation on publicly shaming people. Not in a productive, hold people accountable way, but in a performative, spotlight-seeking way, the kind where the humiliation seems to be the actual goal. Meetings, especially, appear to be his preferred stage. The irony is that for someone who likes to project dominance, he's deeply insecure. Loud authority, thin skin, the kind of person who mistakes intimidation for leadership and sarcasm for intelligence. He doesn't really try it with me anymore, but that wasn't always the case. In one meeting a while back, completely out of nowhere, he aimed a remark at me that was so insulting, so bizarrely misplaced, that it didn't even register as offensive at first. It was clearly meant to embarrass me, sharp, personal, and delivered with that little pause afterward, where the speaker waits for the room to go quiet, so the sting can really land. Instead, I laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not an awkward smile. I laughed, full-on, couldn't-hold-it-back laughter. Then I looked at him and said, genuinely amused, "That was a good one. You should workshop that." The room froze. He was furious. Not because he had crossed a line, that never seems to bother people like him, but because his attempt to publicly diminish me completely backfired. The power dynamic he was trying to establish evaporated the moment I treated his comment like a bad joke instead of a threat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him back. I didn't get defensive. I just handed the moment right back to him, stripped of the authority he thought it carried. He has never tried to insult or bully me again. Later, I found out through my direct manager that he had spent the following 2 weeks complaining about how I had embarrassed him in front of everyone. Apparently, my laughter was the real offense, not his comment, my refusal to be humiliated by it. And honestly, that tracks. It reminds me a lot of school bullies. Different setting, nicer clothes, bigger vocabulary, same behavior. They rely on an unspoken agreement that the target will play their assigned role. Embarrassed, quiet, defensive. The moment you don't follow the script, the whole thing collapses. People like that don't know what to do when their cruelty isn't taken seriously. There's this myth that professionalism requires endless restraint, that the only acceptable response to disrespect is silence or escalation through official channels. But sometimes, the most effective response is simply refusing to grant the behavior the gravity it's demanding. You don't always need to fight harder. Sometimes you just need to stop pretending the fire is impressive. Once the intimidation stops working, they usually move on. Because without fear or shame on the other end, there's nothing in it for them anymore. And that's the part no one tells you early enough. A lot of power only exists if you agree to believe in it. Men who forbid their girlfriends or wives from seeing male doctors, especially male OB-GYNs, are one of the clearest examples of how control can masquerade as concern. Several years ago, when I was pregnant, I spent time in a baby center group. It was meant to be a supportive space, people sharing experiences, asking questions, navigating pregnancy together. What I didn't expect was how often the topic of medical control would come up, specifically women talking about how their husbands or partners would not allow them to see a male obstetrician. Not preferred not to, not felt uncomfortable and discussed it, but outright forbade. One story has stayed with me ever since. A woman shared that her husband had threatened to leave her if she didn't switch hospitals to ensure a female doctor would deliver the baby. The problem was that her regular OB-GYN, a woman, wasn't on call when she went into labor. Labor doesn't care about schedules. She was already in active labor when her husband started insisting she pack up and transfer to another hospital so that a woman doctor would be present. She refused. So he left. He walked out on her while she was giving birth, and did not return after the baby was born. Let that sink in. A man was so invested in controlling which professional was allowed to provide medical care to his wife that he abandoned her during labor and left her alone with a newborn as punishment for refusing to comply. That isn't preference. That isn't jealousy. That isn't protection. That is control, and it is abuse. I've since seen countless similar stories, especially on Reddit. Different details, same pattern. Men framing their demands as morality, tradition, or boundaries, while ignoring the autonomy, safety, and dignity of the person actually undergoing the medical procedure. An OB/GYN is not a sexual participant. They are a trained medical professional whose job is to keep their patient alive and healthy. The idea that a man's insecurity should dictate a woman's access to competent medical care is deeply disturbing and dangerously normalized in some circles. What's especially alarming is how often this behavior escalates during pregnancy, a time when women are physically vulnerable, emotionally taxed, and medically dependent. Control tends to tighten when someone knows the other person has fewer options and more to lose. And it rarely stops at doctors. If a man believes he has the right to decide which medical professionals are allowed to touch his partner, that same logic will eventually show up elsewhere. Who she can talk to, where she can go, what she can wear, how much independence she's permitted to keep. To anyone reading this who recognizes their relationship in these stories, please hear this clearly. Love does not require surrendering bodily autonomy. Respect does not come with ultimatums, and concern does not involve threats, punishment, or abandonment. You are allowed to choose your own doctors. You are allowed to prioritize your health and safety. You are allowed to leave a relationship where control is disguised as care. And yes, you absolutely can do better, because a partner who truly loves you would never make your medical care about their ego. I was dating someone I was absolutely head over heels in love with. Really, the kind of love that makes you think you've found the person you want to spend your entire life with. I could see a future with her. Marriage, maybe kids, a shared life that felt like it was built for us. But there was one problem. One glaring, impossible-to-ignore problem. She couldn't stand me being friends with other women. Not a little uncomfortable. Not, sometimes I wish you'd hang out more with me instead. No, it was full-on, relentless jealousy, suspicion, and control, wrapped in quiet indignation. My office is mostly women. Honestly, some of my coworkers are like family to me. Sisters, confidants, people who've been through the grind, the triumphs, and the disasters of work life alongside me. They're happily in their own long-term relationships, so this wasn't about her imagining anything inappropriate. These were friendships built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. But to her, every laugh with a female coworker, every casual conversation over lunch, every exchange about projects or office gossip became a threat. I couldn't even talk about what someone said at work, if that someone was a woman. I quickly learned that mentioning the actual coworker's name would lead to silent treatment, subtle digs, passive-aggressive comments. So eventually, I found myself swapping in male coworker names instead, just to avoid an argument, just to keep the peace, to avoid the tension that would hang over our interactions like a storm cloud. That's when I realized something essential. This wasn't just jealousy. It wasn't a minor insecurity I could soothe with reassurance. It was control. And no matter how much I loved her, I couldn't tolerate a relationship where my friendships, my social connections, and my daily interactions with people around me were dictated by someone else's insecurities. It wasn't easy. I was planning to marry her. I still think about her sometimes, years later, about the life we could have had, the memories we could have made, the love that was genuinely there. But love isn't enough when the foundation is mistrust. A relationship isn't sustainable when you're constantly bending, hiding, or censoring yourself just to avoid someone else's discomfort. I realized I wasn't willing to avoid 75% of my coworkers and 50% of the general population just to make a partner feel comfortable. That kind of adjustment isn't compromise, it's surrender. And surrendering your own autonomy, your own friendships, your own sense of normal life is not healthy. It's not fair. Ending it was devastating, heartbreaking. It felt like ripping a piece of my soul out. But looking back, I see it clearly. The inability to trust me wasn't about me. It was about her. And no amount of love or good intentions could fix that. Since then, I've carried that lesson into every relationship I've had. Trust isn't optional. It's not negotiable. Respect for each other's independence, our friends, and the lives we lead outside the relationship isn't a bonus. It's the core. Without it, you're building a fragile structure on quicksand. And as much as I still think about her, I also recognize that walking away was the only way to preserve myself, my friendships, and my right to live without constant restriction. Love is amazing, but it shouldn't come with a leash. I went to college with several people who were, honestly, fascinating in the worst way. They had almost no sense of individuality. Not a hobby that wasn't shared, not a preference that wasn't mirrored by someone else, not a thought that existed independently of a partner. Their entire existence seemed to orbit the idea of being a couple, of merging entirely with another person, and projecting that as their identity. It wasn't about friendship, personal growth, or shared joy. It was about maintaining the illusion of a fully synchronized pair. The weirdest part was the extremes of it. Whenever one of them became single, they would vanish almost entirely. Not just socially quiet, but like they dropped off the face of the planet. Weeks, sometimes months, of total absence, until a new partner appeared. And when that happened, they came back fully reborn. Their entire personality seemed to pivot overnight. Interests, hobbies, priorities, even style would completely change, as if the previous version of them had never existed. It was startling. At first you thought maybe you'd imagined who they were before. I got whiplash a few times, honestly. There were a handful I was close to. People I went to concerts, events, and even music festivals with. And then suddenly, they were unrecognizable. 1 month, they were all about hitting multiple music festivals, camping out, immersing themselves in shows and bands they loved. A few months later, they wouldn't touch a music festival with a 10-foot pole. Golf, apparently, had become their entire world, their new identity, their proof that they fit with their new partner. The shift was not subtle. It was total. And it left friends like me blinking, trying to reconcile the person we thought we knew with the person standing in front of us. I've thought about why this happens so much, and I think it really comes down to a deep fear of facing individuality. Some people just aren't ready, or maybe not even allowed, to discover who they are outside of the people they grow up around. In certain cultures or families, independence and personal identity are actively discouraged. You're taught, directly or indirectly, that the self doesn't matter as much as the group. You exist to fit in, to reflect the family, to carry the traditions and expectations of those who matter. So when you plop someone like that into a place like college, suddenly isolated from the family unit or cultural norms that defined them for years, it can be terrifying. Being alone, even briefly, becomes unthinkable. What do you do if no one is there to validate your choices, your likes, your dislikes? For some, the solution is simple. Find another person and attach yourself immediately. Merge identities. Mirror hobbies. Share every interest. That way you don't have to confront the uncomfortable, sometimes painful process of figuring out who you are on your own. You don't have to stand alone, and you don't have to be different in the eyes of the people whose approval you've been conditioned to crave. Watching it unfold in real life was both fascinating and unsettling. It wasn't just about relationships, it was about the absence of self, the fear of being unanchored. And it made me reflect on the incredible value of learning to be comfortable with solitude, with our own choices, with interests that might not line up with anyone else's. Because discovering individuality, really knowing yourself, independent of anyone else, is terrifying for some, but also the most liberating thing you can do. I don't judge them, not entirely. I understand where it comes from, and it makes sense when you consider the cultural and familial pressures at play. But it was a sharp, repeated reminder to me that individuality isn't optional. It's necessary. And for anyone who hasn't yet embraced it, well, sometimes you need a little whiplash to recognize the importance of being your own person. I don't think of myself as attractive. Not really. I've had a long road, a winding journey filled with challenges, mistakes, and personal struggles that left me with deep-seated issues around self-esteem and self-worth. For years, I looked in the mirror and felt nothing but doubt, dissatisfaction, and the nagging idea that I wasn't enough in some way. Not smart enough, not funny enough, not thin enough, not beautiful enough. And yet, people tell me I am attractive. They say I'm stunning, breathtaking, even gorgeous. Strangers, friends, family. The words float my way more often than I expect, and each time I hear them, part of me freezes. Because sometimes I look in the mirror or at a photo I've taken, and I see it. I see a person who is, in some ways, undeniably pretty. I can appreciate my own reflection, and then, in the next moment, the voice in my head whispers a different story. No, they're wrong. You've got the world fooled. Angles, filters, outfits, it's a lie. You're actually just a lump, a mess, barely holding yourself together. It's confusing, and it's exhausting. In the past, I would post pictures online just to hear the validation I craved. I would carefully select an angle, pick the right lighting, craft the perfect caption, and then wait. Wait for someone to tell me, "You're gorgeous, you're beautiful, you're breathtaking." And yes, it felt good. For a moment, it patched over the cracks in my self-esteem, but almost immediately, my brain would sabotage it. I would tell myself, "They're lying. They just want something from you." They'd say that to anyone. Maybe they're just hoping for a chance to sleep with you. Being attractive doesn't shield you from pain or mistreatment. If anything, it exposes you to different kinds of challenges. When you're very good-looking, people assume access, entitlement, closeness. Men, especially, can see it as an invitation, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, to try to get close enough to manipulate or deceive you. That constant attention, that mix of praise and expectation, can warp your sense of reality. It makes you doubt what anyone says, question their motives, wonder if kindness is genuine or if flattery is just a means to an end. So yes, speaking only for myself, I have posted selfies in the past because I was insecure. Because validation felt like a temporary anchor in a sea of self-doubt. And I don't regret it. I don't blame anyone. The people who offered compliments were being kind, and I needed that kindness. As my favorite uncle once said, "It is always best to believe in oneself, but a little help from others can be a great blessing." That help is not shameful. It doesn't make me weak. It makes me human. But now, I am learning. Slowly, steadily, I am putting in the work to stop seeking external validation. Because in the end, whether I am attractive is immaterial. What matters, what truly matters, is whether I am a kind person, a good person, someone who treats others with respect, empathy, and care. That is the measure of worth that lasts. That is the value no mirror or social media comment can truly capture. And I want to say this for anyone reading, all of you are beautiful. All of you are worthy of love, of compassion, of self-respect. You are capable of spreading kindness in ways that ripple far beyond what you imagine. Even on days when you feel small, invisible, or unworthy, your existence matters. Your choices, your words, your actions, they make a difference. I believe in every single person who reads this. I hope that in some way, you can take that belief and pass it on. To your friends, to strangers, to the people you cross paths with in your daily life. Because kindness is contagious. Hope is contagious. Belief in ourselves, the quiet, steady belief, can be contagious too. And the more we believe in ourselves, the more we can see the worth in each other. So if nothing else, I hope you carry this. You are enough. You are capable. You are worthy. And your light, however small it might feel at times, matters more than you know. For people in their teens and 20s especially, this obsession with documenting every single second of life online, the endless day in my life, GRWM, corporate girly, my 5'9" after my 9'5" content, feels less like creativity and more like a collective plea to be seen. Because let's be honest about what's actually happening. If you're stopping every few minutes to set up a camera, adjust lighting, hit record, walk back into the room, and then film yourself doing the most basic human tasks imaginable, this isn't storytelling. It's performance. It's not about sharing something meaningful. It's about proving that you exist in a way that feels externally validated. Getting dressed, making your bed, brushing your teeth, putting on shoes, eating breakfast, starting your car, sitting in traffic, typing on a laptop to signal productivity. These aren't insights. They're not skills. They're not knowledge. They're not even experiences. They're the biological and logistical baseline of being alive in a modern society. And yet they're packaged, edited, captioned, and uploaded as if they're content. What that communicates, whether intentionally or not, is, I don't actually have anything to offer beyond visibility, so please validate me anyway. Please like this. Please comment. Please reassure me that my routine, my body, my lifestyle, my existence matters. And before anyone jumps in defensively, this isn't about jealousy or bitterness or hating fun. It's about recognizing how much emotional energy goes into curating a life instead of actually living one. If you can't brush your teeth or drink coffee without thinking about how it will look on camera, something has gone sideways. There's also a quiet sadness to it. Life becomes less about being present and more about being observed. Moments aren't valuable unless they're documented. Rest isn't real unless it's aesthetic. Work isn't valid unless it looks productive. And identity slowly shifts from who you are to how well you perform normalcy for strangers. It's exhausting, even if people don't realize it yet. And the harsh truth is this: filming yourself doing ordinary things doesn't make them meaningful. Meaning comes from depth, from thought, from contribution, from connection that isn't measured in engagement metrics. Breathing on camera doesn't make breathing profound. What worries me most isn't that people do this, it's why they feel they have to. Because underneath all the soft lighting and trendy audio is often a fear of being invisible. A fear that if no one is watching, then nothing counts. That if you're not being perceived, admired, or affirmed, then maybe you don't exist in a way that matters. But existence doesn't need witnesses to be valid. You don't need to turn your morning routine into content to justify your place in the world. You don't need to aestheticize survival. You don't need to broadcast your life to prove that it has value. And the sooner people realize that being seen by yourself is just as important as being seen by others, the sooner they might stop living for the camera and start actually living. Because you already exist. You already matter. And you don't need to film yourself tying your shoes to prove it. Sometimes I just really want to know what people are saying when I'm not around. I had this old coworker once, the kind of person who had to have a running commentary on everyone else in the office. If someone wasn't there, she had to be talking about them, what they did, what they said, how they acted. Nothing was off limits. And yet somehow, she was always perfectly polite, even friendly to my face. She'd smile, make small talk, and give the kind of nodding approval you'd expect from a colleague. While I just knew there was a parallel conversation going on somewhere behind my back. Honestly, I don't really mind. She can say whatever she likes about me. It doesn't hurt me, it doesn't change who I am, and it doesn't make her words matter in any real way. I'm okay with the idea that she has her opinions. That's her job, apparently. But there's a small, irrational part of me that's curious. Because, let's face it, I'm not particularly dramatic. I'm not eccentric. I'm not that fascinating. I don't do wild things at work. I don't create chaos. And I certainly don't show up like some kind of walking headline. So I can't help but wonder, what does she say about someone like me? Is it as simple as, she's fine, nothing to note? Or does she fill the silence with imagined stories, small exaggerations, or little critiques that I'll never know? There's a strange appeal to that thought, the idea of stepping outside my own perspective and seeing how someone else frames me in their narrative, especially someone whose main pastime is framing other people. It's not envy, it's not insecurity, it's just curiosity, plain and simple. I know it doesn't matter. I know it's probably not worth the effort to try to find out. But I can't help picturing it, her talking non-stop about someone who barely makes a ripple in anyone's day. And in that imagining, I kind of find it funny, and maybe even a little validating, that someone devoted that much energy to analyzing me, even if I don't actually exist in her reality beyond casual chatter. At the end of the day, it doesn't change a thing. I still go to work, do my job, and live my life exactly the same way I always have. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I let myself wonder. I let myself think, if she's talking about me, what exactly is she saying? And it's a tiny, harmless amusement, a peek into the endless theater of other people's minds. Because maybe part of life is that curiosity, wanting to know what you look like from someone else's point of view, even if you're just normal.